Okay, we're going to do a short um, story now, and this is one that I've never read before. When I've read the Twilight chapters and the other short stories that I've read them before, so I could read them a bit more smoothly. Let's see how I do reading one for the first time, just like you're reading it for the first time. This book just came from Amazon.co.jp. It's called Blood Light. Blood Light. It is a series of funny vampire stories by many famous horror and fantasy writers, two of whom I've read quite a bit about from are Charlaine Harris and Jim Butcher. They're two authors I like a lot. And we're going to soon watch um, True Blood, which is an American TV drama about vampires in Louisiana. Um, and The drama is based on stories by Charlaine Harris, and in this collection, there is a short story in that same series. And I've never read that story, so it'll be a first time. And I'm going to try to read it to you now. So let's see if I can find it. This is literally the first time I've opened this book. So, An Evening with Al Gore, funny sounding title. Page 167 by Charlaine Harris. Let's see how I do. An Evening with Al Gore by Charlaine Harris. I have to apologize in advance. We have some guests in the house today. One of the aunties is here, so there might be a little bit of background noise, but we're just going to ignore it and see how we can do. Toddy Makepeace had seen Al Gore speak the previous spring, and a year later she hadn't gotten over it. Toddy, born and bred a realist, was quite aware the former vice president hadn't particularly noticed her when he'd shaken her hand, though he'd looked slightly startled that her grip was so firm. But he'd nodded in approval when she'd told him she intended to join in his fight against people who trashed the planet. Toddy's husband Mark joined in Toddy's new crusade with fervor. He'd seen too many changes in the world to deny that Earth was being damaged and polluted at an alarming rate. Mark and Toddy had no plans to have children, but they did hope to continue enjoying their happy life together. A big part of that happy life was the pleasure they took in their extended exploration of the Earth's remaining wilderness. Having plenty of forests left in the world, preserving an environmentally safe wilderness was vital to the Makepeaces. Through the years, Toddy had gradually assumed the role of moral compass for the pair, while Mark had slipped into a more logistical role. They played to their strengths. Toddy had been recycling newspapers, cans, and plastics for years. She rode a bicycle while she went about her errands in their historic New England village, and she and Mark shared a shower quite often to cut down on the amount of water they used. Mark made sure the accumulated recyclable material made its way to the correct collection site, kept the bicycle in good repair, and enjoyed the showers very much. Toddy was both thorough and conscientious, and after her inspiring connection with Al Gore, she decided it was time to step up her slapdash green efforts a notch or two, or three. She began passing out leaflets at the nearest mall. She put indignant handwritten notes under the windshield wipers of gas-guzzling SUVs. She established a compost heap at the back of the lawn of the charming Victorian house where she and Mark lived. When Mark was sure Toddy wasn't around, he made a face at the smell of the compost heap. He quietly hired a teenager who lived nearby to come and turn the compost, a job Toddy had assigned to Mark. Same difference, Mark figured. He had been charged with getting the job done, and it was. Perhaps Mark wasn't quite as passionate about confronting litterers and polluters as his wife, but he was always present to haul her out of the resultant trouble. Toddy had no problem at all pouncing on a woman who tossed her cigarette butt to the sidewalk. In fact, Toddy had no problem tackling the CEO of a local company that had been caught dumping industrial waste into a remote pond. Since Toddy had followed litterers, pointing out their transgressions at the top of her lungs, and also had quite literally tackled the CEO, the police had come to call at the Makepeace's house more than once. Every time, Toddy's appearance always bought her some grace, without Mark's having to intervene. Toddy was 5 feet tall, pleasantly round and bosomy, and had a head full of red, curly hair. She certainly didn't look her age. In fact, Toddy looked like a naughty teenager who might need to be spanked for her own good. Following the tackling incident, as Mark watched two patrolmen fall under Toddy's spell in 10 minutes, he had a hard time concealing his smile. He'd been watching men fall for his wife for years. How could he blame them? Mark, who was tall and dark and unremarkable, thanked his lucky stars that he and Toddy had found each other in a most unlikely encounter. They'd been separately hiking the Appalachian Trail, and in a remote area they'd happened across a wounded deer some careless hunter had neglected to kill. Their eyes had met over the pitiful, bleeding animal, and they'd been together ever since. On this cool evening, when the policeman had departed, the Makepeaces settled in their gazebo with a bottle of wine. Some couples who'd been together as long as Mark and Toddy had lost the spark, but the two had the good fortune to still find each other exciting. They enjoyed the evenings they got to spend alone together. It was dark, and they lit candles on the table. The backyard of the old house wasn't huge, but it had been carefully planted to provide privacy. "I feel confident Fenton won't press charges," Mark said, after they'd had a sip from their glasses. It was a cool Massachusetts evening, and their cobblestoned village, Bracefield, was quiet and serene, just the way they liked it. Toddy laughed as if such a concept was ridiculous. "Of course he won't," she said. "Think of how silly he would look if he did." She took a breath, and her smile faded. "Mark, I have to confess, I'm getting bored with Bracefield, even with town," she said, and Mark sat up straighter at the change in topic. Bracefield lay outside of Boston, which was very convenient for shopping trips. There was a state park within easy driving distance, where the two spent a lot of time, and they'd made a network of friends in the area, but Toddy seemed quite serious. "We've been here a long time. Maybe we need a change of scene. We might have been more aware of this global crisis earlier if we'd lived in a more enlightened country, or if we were in less of a rut. Why don't we try living somewhere with a more positive attitude toward green issues?" "Like where?" Mark sat down his glass. Toddy, as always, was challenging him to rise to the occasion. "Oh, I don't know. One of the Scandinavian countries? They're much greener than the U.S. Sweden?" "That's an idea," Mark said slowly. "We'd have to learn the language, but we could do that." He found himself unexpectedly enthusiastic. How long had they lived in Bracefield? At least 20 years, he thought. As much as he adored the old house they'd restored, maybe it was time for a change. And as long as they were making a change, why not make it a really big one? Why move to somewhere equally predictable, like Miami or Seattle? In fact, "Toddy, that's a wonderful idea," he said, and watched his wife's face glow. The more Mark considered the excitement of learning a new country, coping with daily living there, making new friendships, and achieving new goals, the more stimulating he found the prospect. "But I don't want to just slink away," Toddy said. Mike understood they'd entered a phase 2 of the conversation. "I want to leave with a big bang, like Bilbo in The Lord of the Rings." "You want to slip on an invisibility ring and disappear in a giant explosion?" Toddy laughed and refilled their glasses. "No, Mark, not exactly. I want to do something for America before we go. I've always been a patriot, you know that. What form do you want this service to take? You know I'm willing to help you do whatever you want." "You're so sweet," Toddy said. She laid her hand on his. "I'll think about it and let you know." While Toddy considered her patriotic duty, Mark began to wind down the Makepeace's extensive financial affairs. He knew Toddy. She wouldn't change her mind. One evening, after their housekeeper, Mrs. Powers, had left, Toddy put her arm around Mark's neck. "We're going to have a party," she told Mark. "A really special party. I think we'll need Purcell and Dina Colville to help us." Mark raised his eyebrows at that. Purcell and Dina were old friends they hadn't seen in, well, years. Mark realized when he thought about it. "That'll be nice," he said, though rather doubtfully. The Colvilles were almost as wealthy as Mark and Toddy, and they were an attractive couple, but Mark had never been as fond of the two as Toddy was. Dina and Purcell were a little cold-blooded for his taste, but since he loved Toddy, he began thinking of practical arrangements.